Coco. My mother smirked. He should be grateful to even be here. But when my son looked up and said, I know why you don't like me, my father's whiskey glass froze midair, and what followed left everyone in that lodge realizing the cost of silence, control, and the family they thought they understood. The tires crunched over fresh snow as Ethan's SUV pulled into the lodge driveway, headlights cutting through the swirling dusk. The outline of the building emerged, just as he remembered it. Weathered timber, a sagging roofline patched in places, and antlers still nailed above the entrance like a trophy to stubbornness. Tyler peered through the windshield, face unreadable, backpack clutched tight in his lap. It's not big, Ethan said, trying to fill the silence. But it's ours. His son didn't reply. Inside, the scent hit first, wood smoke, varnish, and something older, like forgotten memories. The front desk sat under a flickering sconce, manned with rigid posture by Franklin, whose clipboard might as well have been military issue. He looked up as they entered, eyes narrowing not unkindly, just sharply, as if measuring the years since he'd last seen his son. You're late, he said. Roads were slick, Ethan replied, dropping their duffel bags by the door. Franklin gave a short nod, then reached for the check-in ledger like this was any other guest. Room 4. The heater sticks, knock it twice. Joanne made a stew. Before Ethan could say anything else, Joanne's reflection appeared in the glass pane of the cafe behind them, silver hair neatly pinned, arms folded like a judgment she hadn't voiced yet. She didn't come out to greet them, only inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement. Ethan's eyes followed hers to Tyler. What a little traveler, she said through the open pass-through window, voice smooth with artificial warmth. You've grown. I suppose boys don't eat much these days. Tyler stiffened, but said nothing. Ethan forced a smile. We're just settling in. Of course. She returned to the kitchen, her voice trailing into a murmur. Upstairs, room 4 looked exactly as it had when Ethan was a boy, pine paneling, plaid curtains, the mounted bobcat above the dresser still bearing its dusty fangs. Tyler wandered to the window, watched snow spiral under the porch light. Are they always like that? He asked quietly. Ethan hesitated. They're complicated. Tyler didn't respond. He unpacked his hoodie and headphones, laid them on the bed with precise care, then sat, hands in his lap. Dinner was stew and dry bread in the cafe's back room. Joanne served it herself, with a tight smile. She didn't speak directly to Tyler again, only offered side comments, careful, it's hot, and well, some boys have small appetites. Franklin chewed in silence, occasionally sipping beer, eyes locked on the wall behind them. Ethan tried to lead conversation, ski season, school, the drive, but it slipped through the cracks like melting snow through floorboards. Tyler barely touched a stew. Later, as they climbed the stairs to bed, Ethan glanced back and saw his mother still sitting at the table, a single wine glass in hand. She didn't look up. The past, it seemed, hadn't moved an inch. Dinner had cooled by the time the silence became unbearable. The clink of utensils echoed in the cramped cafe dining nook, wood-paneled walls pressing inward like an audience that had seen this play before. A faded elk stared glassily from over the fireplace, its antlers casting shadows that twitched with every flicker of the flame. Joanne sipped white wine from a tall-stemmed glass, eyes narrowed slightly as she watched Tyler prod a carrot in his bowl. You know, she said, with a smile so thin it could have been etched in ice, when your father was your age, he cleaned his plate before speaking a word. Ethan's fork paused midair. Tyler didn't look up. He was always active. Ran around the lodge from sunup to supper. You, she added, tilting her head, seem more delicate. Franklin took a slow sip of beer, his elk steak already half finished. He hadn't spoken since sitting down. Ethan cleared his throat. He's adjusting. Long trip. Of course. Joanne's gaze flicked to the boy again. Still, we should be grateful, shouldn't we, Tyler? You're being included. Tyler's fingers tightened around his spoon. The room felt colder, somehow, despite the fire. Then he spoke, calm, quiet, surgical. I know why you don't like me. The words hung there, stunning in their simplicity. Ethan turned sharply. Joanne blinked, her wine paused halfway to her lips. What's that, sweetheart? She said lightly, but her voice had gone taut at the edges. Tyler looked her straight in the eye, and in that moment, he looked older than 11. You see my mom every time you look at me, and you've never forgiven Dad for choosing her. Silence collapsed over the table like snow from a broken roof. Joanne let out a brittle laugh. Well, aren't you perceptive? I'm not trying to be mean, Tyler added, his voice steady. I just wanted to know if I was right. Ethan's jaw clenched. He looked to Franklin, who continued eating as if nothing had happened, his knife working methodically through meat and sinew. You're a guest here, Joanne said at last, her smile now weaponized with grace. It would be nice to act like one. Tyler looked at his father, waiting. But Ethan, tongue heavy with swallowed years, said nothing. His hands were tied around his napkin under the table. Tyler stood. I'm not hungry. He walked out. Ethan sat still, the space beside him suddenly feeling twice as empty. You should talk to him, Joanne said, still calm, eyes fixed on the dying fire. Ethan rose from the table without replying. Franklin remained, cutting his last bite of steak with quiet precision, chewing in silence. The lodge had fallen silent, save for the wind scratching against the windows and the creak of old beams adjusting to the cold. The fire downstairs had burned low, casting flickering amber across the hearthstone, but no one moved to tend it. Ethan found Franklin outside on the second-floor balcony, leaning against the wooden railing, a heavy glass of whiskey balanced in his thick fingers. Snow drifted silently from a starless sky, covering the pine-strewn hillside in a slow burial. He didn't look over when Ethan stepped out. "Didn't think you drank anymore," Ethan said quietly. "I don't," Franklin muttered, then took another sip. "Except when I do." They stood in silence. A cold that didn't come from the air settled in Ethan's bones. "I should have said something back there," Ethan said at last, his voice rough. Franklin's gaze stayed fixed on the trees below. "Didn't expect him to say it for you." Ethan flinched. He shouldn't have had to. Franklin took a long drink, then set the glass on the railing, watching the ice melt. "He's got more spine than I gave him credit for." "He's 11, Ethan said, "and already better at facing the truth than I ever was." Franklin nodded, slowly. "You think I didn't know she blamed you? Every time she looked at your boy, it was like rewinding her whole life. So why'd you let her treat him that way?" Ethan's voice cracked with years of bottled questions. "Why didn't you stop her from turning this place into a mausoleum for everything she couldn't control?" Franklin sighed. "Because I thought keeping her meant keeping us." The words hovered between them, carried on breath that fogged and disappeared into the night. "I spent years waiting for her to forgive me," Ethan said. "For leaving. For marrying someone she hated. For not staying here, pretending all of this was normal." Franklin finally turned to look at him, not angrily, not even apologetically. "Just tired. You think I didn't feel it, too? She didn't just shut you out. She shut out everything that didn't fit her picture." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, the cold biting at his scalp. "So we all stayed quiet. For her." Franklin nodded. "Cowards, both of us." "No," Ethan said, his voice steadier now. "I was. You were just afraid to lose what little she gave you." They fell into silence again, this time less bitter, more like the tail end of a long breath. "She's not going to change," Franklin said finally. "I'm not asking her to anymore," Ethan replied. Snow kept falling, slow, endless, and soft as forgetting. Inside, behind the balcony doors, the mounted animals stared on with their frozen, unblinking eyes. But for the first time in years, Ethan felt seen. The lodge had long since gone quiet. No guest remained at this time of year, just the ghosts that lingered in hallways and behind old wallpaper. Ethan moved softly down the stairs, drawn by a pale sliver of light beneath the staff lounge door. He paused at the threshold, then pushed it open. Joanne sat on the worn couch, one leg crossed over the other, wine glass perched delicately between her fingers. The TV in front of her flickered with a muted cooking show, a woman in a bright kitchen slicing tomatoes with surgical precision. The volume was off, the sound unnecessary. Joanne wasn't watching it anyway. "You couldn't sleep either," Ethan said. She didn't look at him. Didn't feel like pretending. He entered slowly and stood beside the coffee table, not sitting yet. "Tyler was right, you know." That got her attention. Joanne's lips tightened, then relaxed, but only slightly. "He's a sharp boy. Not very polite, but sharp." Ethan exhaled through his nose. "He's 11. And you've already made him feel like a mistake." Joanne set the wine down, the glass ticking softly on the wood. "I never hated the boy." "No?" Ethan asked. "Because you never made him feel welcome." She looked up at him then, eyes colder than the windows. "I never asked for her son to be part of my legacy." Ethan froze. There it was. The word she hadn't used until now, her. As if his ex-wife still haunted the lodge, still stained the upholstery. "He's my son," Ethan said, quietly. "He didn't ask to be born into your disappointment." Joanne's face didn't shift. "You brought him here." "I brought him here," Ethan repeated, "because I thought maybe it wasn't too late for you to know him. To know me again." Her laugh was quiet, not amused, but bitter, empty. "You didn't leave because of me, Ethan. You left because you were always going to. You never had it in you to stay." He stepped forward then, not with anger, but clarity. "You didn't lose me because I left. You lost me because you never tried to keep me." For a moment, Joanne didn't respond. She stared at the TV, where the cook now stirred something in a steaming pot, smiling silently. Finally, she reached for her wine again. "You would have left anyway." Ethan didn't argue. There was nothing more to win here. No breakthrough coming. Just the understanding that whatever had cracked tonight had done so long ago, and hadn't been repaired since. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "Not anymore." He turned to leave. As he pulled the door gently closed behind him, Joanne remained on the couch, glass in hand, eyes fixed on the television where no sound played, and no one spoke. Ethan awoke to the muted hum of winter silence. No footsteps, no creaking floorboards, just the soft hush of falling snow pressing gently against the windows. Tyler wasn't in bed. A moment of panic surged before he noticed the faint glow seeping in beneath the door. He threw on a sweatshirt and padded downstairs, the floorboards creaking under his weight like reluctant confessions. The cafe was lit only by a lamp over the counter. Tyler sat alone in one of the corner booths, legs dangling above the floor, a mug of hot cocoa steaming beside him. A single slice of toast sat on a plate, untouched. He had pulled his hoodie tight around his small frame, and the sleeves had nearly swallowed his hands. Ethan paused in the doorway, watching his son in the stillness. There was no sadness in Tyler's posture, no anger, just a kind of waiting. He approached quietly. Couldn't sleep? Tyler shook his head. Didn't want to. Ethan slid into the booth across from him, the seat cold beneath him. The cocoa smelled faintly of cinnamon, a lodge tradition that used to mean warmth. Now it felt ceremonial, hollow. Tyler didn't look at him when he asked, "Do we have to come back here again?" The question wasn't sharp. There was no accusation in it. Just curiosity, a child asking if they had to revisit a pain they'd already filed away. Ethan stared at his son, at the small hands wrapped around the mug, the steady voice that carried more wisdom than he wanted it to. And for the first time in days, maybe years, he didn't try to defend the past. "No," he said. "We're done." Tyler nodded once, slowly. He didn't smile, didn't cry. He simply turned back to the window, watching the snow spiral down past the cafe's flickering sign. His breath fogged the glass for a second, then vanished. And somehow, in that silence, he said everything. Ethan looked at the boy in front of him and saw what he hadn't been able to see in himself for years, the strength to walk away, not in anger, but in peace. He reached across the table and placed his hand over Tyler's. The boy let it rest there. They sat like that as the first streaks of dawn began to lighten the snow-covered woods beyond the frosted glass. Two people finally choosing not to repeat what they'd been born into. The SUV engine idled in the early morning haze, breath and exhaust mingling in the frigid air. The snow had softened the world overnight, burying the gravel paths, smoothing over the tracks that brought them here. A storm might have passed, but the sky remained a dull, unyielding gray. Ethan secured the last bag in the trunk, shut it with a muted thump, and turned toward the lodge one last time. Franklin stood at the rental counter inside, just beyond the glass entryway, hands resting on the wooden frame as though anchoring himself. He watched them with a quiet gravity, his breath leaving faint ghosts on the window. Joan didn't come out. She sat in her usual spot in the cafe, coffee in hand, staring straight ahead as though the snow, the car, the leaving, none of it concerned her. Her figure was only partially visible through the frost-glazed pane, half faded behind the fogged glass. Ethan couldn't tell if she was watching them or avoiding it entirely. He stepped toward the entrance, and Franklin met him just outside the door, bundled in an old parka that smelled faintly of cedar and ash. They didn't speak at first, just stood there, snow crunching under their boots, their breath rising between them like steam off a cooling pot. "I'm sorry," Franklin said. The words came without embellishment. No preamble, no excuses. "I should have said something a long time ago." Ethan nodded, the weight of forgiveness neither accepted nor denied, just acknowledged. "She'll never change," Franklin added after a pause. "Eyes still on the SUV." "I don't need her to," Ethan said. They stood in silence again, the kind that no longer needed to be filled. Not with anger, not with explanation. Only with presence, a final recognition that this was the goodbye they'd always danced around. Franklin looked toward the car. "He's a good kid." Ethan followed his gaze. Tyler sat in the front seat, watching them without expression, hands folded in his lap. Calm, expectant, ready. "He is," Ethan said. "He sees everything." Franklin swallowed, jaw tightening. "Don't be a stranger." Ethan offered a sad smile. "Don't be a ghost." They didn't shake hands, didn't hug. The moment didn't need it. As Ethan turned and walked back to the SUV, Franklin remained on the porch, becoming smaller in the rearview mirror with every step. Joanne never moved from her place by the window. He slid into the driver's seat. Tyler didn't say anything, just leaned his head against the glass and watched the snow-covered trees pass by as Ethan pulled onto the narrow road. No drama, no parting speech, just the quiet confirmation that not everyone can or should be saved. The highway unspooled before them like a silver thread, flanked on both sides by towering pines heavy with snow. The sun had broken through at last, its pale light making the frost shimmer like spun glass. Tire tracks carved faint lines in the powder, the only sign of movement in an otherwise frozen world. Ethan drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely in his lap. He glanced at the rearview mirror, watching the mountains recede behind them. The lodge, its memories, its weight, had finally been left in the trees. Beside him, Tyler sat quietly, watching the landscape pass through the window. His breath occasionally fogged the glass, but he didn't draw shapes in it like he used to when he was younger. He simply observed, Alert, calm, unburdened. She's never going to be different, is she? Tyler asked without turning. Ethan didn't answer right away. The honesty of the question deserved the same in return. No, he said. That's her problem. Tyler nodded, like he'd already known but needed to hear it aloud. Then he leaned his forehead to the window and closed his eyes. Ethan felt something shift. Not like an epiphany, but a loosening, a knot he'd been carrying in his chest for years, quietly untying itself without fanfare. They drove on. A year later, the postcard arrived, a generic birthday card from Joanne, the kind with foil-stamped balloons and a pre-printed poem inside. The handwriting was neat, careful, and signed beyond, "Love, Grandma." There was no message, no memory, just obligation in an envelope. Tyler opened it in the kitchen, flipped it over once, then tossed it onto the counter next to a cereal box without comment. He went back to buttering his toast, utterly unmoved. Ethan picked up the card, read it, and set it down again. He watched his son across the table, older now, taller, more confident in the way he moved through space. Tyler didn't even look up. That simple, indifferent gesture, the tossing aside of a long shadow, said everything Ethan needed to hear. There was no lingering ache, no search for approval, just a boy eating toast on his birthday, free from someone else's bitterness. And in that moment, Ethan understood what freedom really was, not escape, but the refusal to inherit what was never yours to carry. He smiled, reached across the table, and ruffled Tyler's hair. Tyler made a face, but didn't resist. "Seriously, Dad. Happy birthday," Ethan said, grinning. "Yeah," Tyler replied, taking a bite. "It is."